The reading from God's Word today is John 9, 1 through 23. As he passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus answered, "It was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." Having said these things, he spit on the ground and made mud with the saliva. Then he anointed the man's eyes with the mud and said to him, "Go, wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. The neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar were saying, "Is this not the man who used to sit and beg?" Some said, "It is he." Others said, "No, but he is like him." He kept saying, "I am the man." So they said to him, "Then how were your eyes opened?" He answered, "The man called Jesus made mud and anointed my eyes and said to me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' So I went and washed and received my sight." They said to him, "Where is he?" He said, "I do not know." They brought the Pharisees to the man who had formerly been blind. Now it was the Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. So the Pharisees again asked him how he had received his sight. And he said to them, "He put mud on my eyes, and I washed, and I see." Some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath." But others said, "How can a man who is a sinner do such signs?" And there was a division among them. So they said again to the blind man, "What do you say about him, since he has opened your eyes?" He said, "He is a prophet." The Jews did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight, until they called the parents of the man who had received his sight and asked them, "Is this your son, who you say was born blind? How then does he now see?" His parents answered, "We know that this is our son and that he was born blind. But how he now sees we do not know, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him, for he is of age. He will speak for himself." His parents said these things because they feared the Jews. For the Jews had already agreed that if anyone should confess Jesus to be Christ, he was to be put out of the synagogue. Therefore, his parents said, "He is of age. Ask him." This is the word of the Lord.
Good morning. There you are. Hi, friends. Good morning. Jamie Leahy here, getting to continue in our series on controversial Jesus in the Gospel of John. Controversial Jesus in the Gospel of John. So glad that you're here this morning. August, it's close to an end, but don't worry. Department of Education, first day of school, September 10th. So the city's not going to get crowded for a little while longer. So you can enjoy those moments in the morning when you're like, "Where is everyone?" They're not here right now. But you're here right now. We're here right now. Continuing in John chapter 9 this morning with a man born blind. A man born blind. You know, the sermon is called Born Blind, as you see on the guide. But if I told you what the secret title of this sermon is, it is a sermon for my friends. In considering this text this morning, I wonder what it would be like to try to explain John 9 to a lot of people that I love who are not churchgoers or even consider themselves religious. That might be some of you in this room. Might be some of you that I'm sending this sermon to later on today. Hey there, I love you. This is a man born blind. In verse 1, we see in a man born blind, Jesus. It says, as Jesus passed by, Jesus saw a man blind from birth. I don't know how much you know about Jesus, but throughout the Gospels, we see that this is the way that Jesus moves through the world and the way that Jesus moves through a crowd. He often finds the people who are most hurting, loneliness, the ones that we typically overlook, he turns his attention to. We saw this a couple of weeks ago when Jesus turned his attention to a lame man whose legs had not worked in 38 years. And now this morning in chapter 9, we see Jesus turns his attention to a man who was born blind. What's interesting is that the man sees the man born blind. He turns his full attention, his full loving attention to a man who can't see him. He is a man who's overlooked, ignored, and undervalued. And before we get into the glory and the healing, it's important to consider for a minute Jesus sees a man who can't see him. You know, in the year 2026, we would call a man born blind from birth disabled. His blindness is a physical disability that prevents him from participating in society without special care or accommodation. Disability, some of us know, is a really difficult and often painful word. In our modern context, especially since the American Disabilities Act of 1966, we classify disabilities as things that are physical or emotional or cognitive. One of the reasons why we have the Disabilities Act of 1966 is that society for a long time in lots of places throughout history has overlooked the disabled. We even disdained people with physical and intellectual disabilities, but not Jesus. We often value people based on how marketable their skills are, how much economic value they can bring to their community, but not Jesus. And no one wants to be called disabled because no one wants to think that they don't matter because they don't contribute in the same way as others can. But that's not how Jesus sees them. For example, in American schools, we talk about learning disabilities. I work in a school and have worked in a school for students, only for students with disabilities, for 21 years. And students with learning disabilities are students that require specialized instruction or accommodation to participate fully in a learning environment. I can tell you firsthand the experience of sitting with a young person who realizes and comes to terms for the fact for the first time that by no fault of their own, they were born dyslexic. They can't read like other people. And sometimes they've managed to get by because they have a younger sibling or brother or sister who's been reading their homework to them for the last 4 or 5 years. What's really amazing in 2026 is that we have ways to teach dyslexics. We could teach them how to read. Because of neuroplasticity and specialized instruction, we can actually change the way a dyslexic's brain works through years of very tedious and sometimes painful remediation. We could teach dyslexics how to read. It's a disability that sometimes people own because they feel like they've defeated it. Julia Garner is an excellent example of this, an actress in movies like series like Ozark or a movie like Weapons. She's a celebrity dyslexic. We have lots of celebrity dyslexics. And we know she's a dyslexic because she's beautiful and successful. She has in some ways overcome her disability to the point where she's able to celebrate, well, that was really hard for me, but I got nominated for an Oscar. But what about when physical, emotional, or cognitive disabilities can't be remediated? What about when they can't be overcome? Like a child that's born with severe autism. A child who begins usually around the age of 2 to display behaviors like humming and hand flapping and failing to make basic eye contact. A young child who is always going to be limited in some ways, who's always going to be vulnerable in many ways, who has no remedy for their condition. One person who talks really well about this is Sho Baraka. If you know Sho Baraka at all, he's a Christian hip-hop artist and an activist. In these days, he's also a writer for Christianity Today, and he has 2 autistic sons, Zakiah and Zimri. And someone asked him once, what causes autism? And his response was, I don't know, but it causes me to be more compassionate. It causes me to see others. And that's what happens to this blind man this morning. The man's condition, his pain, causes Jesus to take notice of him. Michael Beetz, in his really insightful book, Disability and the Gospel, says, slide, that while we tend to think of failing and struggle and weakness as lowering our value in the eyes of others, this man born blind gets the attention of Jesus for his blindness. The blind man demonstrates our spiritual condition before God and Jesus as the only possible remedy. But obviously, when a person is disabled or has a disability, we have questions. We always have questions. We just have one question, right? The question we go to immediately is why? Why is this happen? And in verse 2, that's exactly what the disciples are asking. Rabbi, why was this man born blind? What's the reason? Is it because his parents sinned? Is it because he sinned? I don't know how you've sinned before you're born, but yes, was it him? Like, Jesus, why did this happen? And Jesus' response it's an interesting one. He says that it's not that the man has sinned or his parents, but that the works of God may be displayed in him. Which actually presents us with a second problem this morning. What do you think it means when Jesus says that the works of God might be displayed in him? Here's what we sometimes say. We see a person with a disability or some level of suffering, and we say, either to them or in our own minds, God has a plan. Or, a favorite of mine recently, everything happens for a reason. But that's what we want from Jesus' statement. We want Jesus' statement to be a general statement about all difficulties and disabilities to give us an explanation, a theodicy for the man's condition. We want Jesus to say something that speaks to the man, but also to our pain too, an explanation that can contain the pain and narrow the complexities of suffering on down for us. But I would argue this morning that these kinds of explanations, God has a plan, everything happens for a reason, these explanations, they're really too narrow for disabilities. They're really too narrow for the sufferings and complexities that these things bring. It makes God seem cruel, and our explanations seem godlike. For example, again, in my school community, for reasons I don't entirely understand, in the learning disabilities community, you get lots of twins. You get lots of twins, two people who are born out of the same womb at approximately the same time, and one twin excels academically. They don't go to my school. And the other twin is disabled. They have a learning disability. And the question they ask is, why? Why him and not her? Why am I the one who's disabled and not my brother or sister? We could ask in this context, what's God's plan? The answer is, we don't know. You don't know. And that's okay. My observation is that suffering and disability oftentimes is more mystery than math. We really don't know why things are distributed the way that they are. And Jesus, in many ways, is not saying that here in verse 2. He's saying something better. Jesus is telling us, Jesus is speaking to this particular man at this particular moment with this particular disability, that something uniquely wonderful in all of human history is about to happen. There's a wonderful act that Jesus is about to do. There's a wonderful thing that he's going to do that's going to display the glory of God, because it's going to be a sign. The Gospel of John is all about signs. This is sign number 6. It's going to be a sign that points to the essential work of Jesus, the essential work of God in the person of Jesus Christ, because Jesus is the promised Messiah and the Savior of God. This disability, this sign, this man born blind, this personal interaction and the miracle that follows is a sign that points to Jesus. It points to Jesus as the Messiah. Hundreds of years before Jesus appears on the scene, there is a prophet who claims to speak the words of God. His name is Isaiah. And he speaks of this mysterious figure, this character called the servant of the Lord. In Isaiah 42, God speaks to this servant that he's going to send to bring his salvation. And he says to the servant, I am going to give you as a covenant for the people, a light for the nations, to open the eyes that are blind, to bring out the prisoners from the dungeon, for the prison for those who sit in dark. This is a messianic miracle that Jesus is doing here. Healing a man born blind fulfills the prophecy that Jesus is the light of the nations. That's what we're seeing here in John 9 this morning. That Jesus is the one that the Father has sent into the world to be the light of the world, to be the one who opens the eyes of the blind, and Jesus is literally doing that. He does it for the man born blind, and the claim of the Gospels is he does it in some way for all of us. But here's the issue. If Jesus is the light of the nations, well, then we are the ones who are living in the dark. If Jesus opens blind eyes, then in some way, we also are ones born blind. Now, I know that that's a pretty offensive idea. That this man born blind somehow is supposed to point out to a world born blind. But I just wonder if we could sit with the discomfort of that for a minute and see if we have at least some common ground with this idea. I mean, at least personally, commonly. We often talk about how people in our lives are blind. Oh, she is dating this guy. Love is so blind. She's so over the top for them, right? You have these friends who are like, oh my gosh, does she even see how he acts? Right? We talk about love is blind all the time. A person who, because of their intense feelings for someone, seems to overlook things that are obvious to the rest of us. Love is blind. Sometimes it's those, okay, I know you're a little judgmental, I am too. You know those mismatched couples you see walking down the street where you're like, ooh, look at her. Oh, look at him. He must be really funny. Or he must make a lot of money, right? They don't belong together. Love is blind. Or when we get in an argument with someone and we're trying to convince them of their point of view and we feel like we've been as persuasive as we can be, we get upset and we say, can't you see it? Can't you see what I'm saying? And the answer, of course, is no. They're blind to that. Or maybe, and this is one of the most interesting ones in recent years, there's a lot of talk, especially in workplaces and workplace trainings, around implicit bias. This idea that there's a blindness that's born into us that inclines us to stereotyping and prejudice. It's a kind of personal blindness. And there are lots of workshops and lots of work you can do too. It's a bit paradoxical so that you can see your own blindness. But we kind of acknowledge personally that there are ways that people are blind. There are things we can't see, and we're not really sure why we can't see it. But we also have talked about this culturally. In a societal way, there are ways that society is blind. One great example is Nobel Prize winning the author, I'll start from the beginning there. In the mid-90s, there's a guy named José Saramago. He's a Portuguese writer. He won the Nobel Prize in Literature, and he wrote a wonderful book called Blindness. Now, it's helpful to know that José Saramago is a pretty outspoken atheist. And he writes this book, Blindness, about an epidemic of blindness, what he calls white blindness. That for reasons that are not terribly clear, people suddenly can no longer see anything but whiteness. And this epidemic of blindness draws out all of the horrors of society. All of the things that seem wrong are drawn to the surface when people can no longer see. I wonder if that explains a little bit of our world. And the protagonists at the end of the story, it's a man and a woman, they're both nameless. They're trying to understand what happened here. And so one character asks another and says, why did we become blind? Well, I don't know. Perhaps one day we'll find out. Do you want me to tell you what I think? Yes, please do. I don't think that we did go blind. I think that we are blind. Blind seeing people. Blind people who can see, but do not see. Isn't that interesting? Saramago, who's certainly no friend of Christianity, from his point of view, has noticed a kind of pervasive blindness in society. But perhaps the quintessential pop culture example of this is The Matrix. Now, I know The Matrix is a movie that's over 26 years old, and so not half of you don't know what it is, but you do know the meme, right? Red pill, blue pill. There is this famous scene in The Matrix that's now just mostly a meme to most of my young friends here of the red pill or the blue pill. And the question, of course, is what exactly is that choice? This is seltzer. What exactly is that choice? It helps keep the lips soft. What is the red pill or the blue pill? What is Neo being offered? He's being offered an opportunity to see reality as it is. And so Neo chooses the red pill, and he literally wakes up. He wakes up eventually on an operating table, and he opens his eyes in a different world, and his eyes hurt. And he says to Morpheus, the man who made him the offer of the red pill or the blue pill, why do my eyes hurt? And Morpheus responds, because you've never used them before. All along, everything that Neo thought was life was really not life at all. He was born blind, but now he sees for the first time. The Bible argues that this is the spiritual condition of all humanity. It's common for all people. It's not religious or irreligious. It's everybody. There's, again, from Isaiah. Isaiah paints this picture in Isaiah 59 of this condition that the servant of the Lord is going to come to remedy. And he says, we hope for light, but behold, it is only darkness. We hope for brightness, but we walk in the gloom. We grope for the wall like the blind. We grope like those who have no eyes. We stumble as at noonday. We hope for justice, but get none. We hope for salvation, but it is far from us. The Bible lays out from the beginning that humanity's common problem is that we are born spiritually blind. There's something essential about the world and about living that we cannot see without outside help. Paul explores this pretty extensively in Romans. And he points out, and I think this is really interesting and important, especially if you consider yourself a non-religious person. Paul is interested in not one blindness, but two. He's not dividing the world up into religious and non-religious, and religious people see things rightly and non-religious people don't. He actually does something very different. In Romans 1, he addresses the non-religious person, which is many of my friends and coworkers, and was for the first 30-so years of my life, that was me. And as many of us were non-religious know, you can make a lot of meaning out of life without religion. This idea that Christians walk around with, that everybody has a God-sized hole, I don't know many New Yorkers that would agree with that. We make our meaning in life. We've kind of figured out what to do. We have our causes and things that are important to us. We might have grown up with some religious obligations. Many people do. Went to a Jesuit high school, grew up Catholic, participated in your bar mitzvah or bar mitzvah. Then you go to college and you kind of look at other varied points of views and you move on. You might believe in God or gods or have some sense of spirituality, but you don't pay it much attention unless you feel like you're in danger. And Paul in Romans 1 verse 21 offers an explanation. He says that although we knew God, we did not honor him as God or give thanks to God. And so, because of that, we became futile in their thinking. Their foolish hearts were darkened. Foolish hearts darkened is a kind of blindness of the heart, a failure to acknowledge or value something which is essential or ultimate, God. And it is not, as the Bible argues, it's not that non-religious people don't worship, it's just that we didn't worship God. Let me explain. You see, whatever is at the center of your life, that's what you worship. That's what the Bible means by the word worship. So whatever it is that's at the hub of your existence, or the thing that's the top of your list of significance, the thing that tells you who you are or how you should live, that's what the Bible means by worship. It's the thing that centers your life. You center your life around it. It gives you purpose. It gives you meaning. It gives you identity. It's not that your life is without purpose, identity, and meaning without God. It's that the thing at the center is something like your children, or your comfort, or your sexuality, or your gender identity, or your curated image, or your job. And the problem that comes up with that Paul's trying to tell us in Romans 1 is here, well, Dr. Timothy Keller always says it better than I do, so here's his slide. He says, the human heart loves to make a good thing into a God thing. The main problem of our heart is not so much the desire for bad things, but it is our over-desire for good things. We turn created good things into gods. What's that mean? It's an object of our worship, the thing we put at the center of our life and we serve. And the worst thing that can happen to us is that we are given over to what our hearts desire. That's what Paul says in Romans 1. Here's an example that Keller uses. Take a man who worships his career. He serves it as if it's going to make him somebody. He serves it, it dominates his life, and everything else in his life fits around it. What's the worst thing that can happen to that man? A promotion. A promotion allows him to think that he can find blessing in his over desires. It convinces him that this is really life. What's happening in the meantime? He's forgetting the total wreckage that making his career the center of his life is doing to his marriage, it's doing to his family, it does to his friendships, because his career has become his God. It's the thing at the center. And what happens to him? He becomes blind. He becomes blind to the wreckage this is making of his life. And that's what Paul is trying to talk about in the New Testament. The Bible calls this condemnable thing sin. It's a blindness for the man not to know what is most valuable in life and to esteem what is most ultimate. Instead, he wreaks total havoc on his existence. And listen, I know that we agree with Paul because we keep making movies about this, right? I'm getting old again. The original Mary Poppins, not the second one, the original one. Mr. Banks. What's Mr. Banks' problem? He's all about the bank. How do we know Mr. Banks is no longer all about the bank? Flies a kite. Let's go fly a kite. Thank you. Yes, that's the salvation song of Mr. Banks. Let's go fly a kite. There's Christopher Robin, the movie Christopher Robin with Ewan McGregor, because I secretly love Ewan McGregor. Christopher Robin, he forgets that he knew Pooh Bear. Why? He's a lawyer. Sorry, lawyers. He works too much. Or, probably best movie in this genre, Robin Williams in Hook. A man who is so blind to the truth that he forgets the fact that he used to be Peter Pan. Beautiful movie. Each of them needs some kind of outside intervention because their foolish heart has been darkened. They are spiritually blind. But Paul makes a second point here, and maybe it's a surprising one. In Romans 2, he addresses the religious person, and he says that they are spiritually blind also. Now, that might surprise you. It doesn't surprise most of my non-religious friends or many people we meet in the city who have often come to the city to escape religious communities. There are some good reasons why people blame religion for the world's evils and why they feel confused about the dissimilarities between Jesus and Christians. And according to Paul in Romans 2, they're not entirely wrong. The remedy to spiritual blindness isn't religion. Paul in Romans 2 verse 3 says, to the religious person, do you suppose, O man, that you who judge non-religious people for doing such things, but yet you do things yourself, do you think that you will escape the judgment of God? Some of Paul's harshest words are for the religious person, and that, by the way, is the context of John 9. Jesus is pointing out spiritual blindness to the spiritual elite Pharisees that are around him. The religious are blind because they carry a sense of superiority. It can be moral, it can be cultural, it can be racial. That somehow, through comparison, we remove ourselves from the company of sinners. This is how racism and Christianity can coexist in the church. That I'm right with God for some reason that makes me better than them. That can be a Christian who looks down on non-Christians. It can be a type of Christian who looks down on other types of Christians, who feels like they're made righteous by their superiority over others and not the work of Christ. And oftentimes, Paul goes on to say that in trusting in our piety, we become so sure, I love this language of Paul, that you yourself are a guide to the blind and a light to those in darkness. And yet, we fail to judge others with the same standard, fail to judge ourselves with the same standard that we judge others. I used to do this for a long time, just as a side note, just based on my job. I'm in education, and everybody knows teachers are wonderful. You know who's not wonderful? People in finance. Oh, so sorry. Clearly, you've had the much more noble profession. Or if you're in a nonprofit, oh boy, right? You just put on your crown. Right? That's a kind of superiority, that somehow we think that what we do is more honoring of God because it falls into this one category when all of work can be honoring to God. We do these kinds of things all the time. We set ourselves in comparison above other people and look down. And Paul says that's a spiritual blindness. Or theologian John Stott says it this way on the slide. We work ourselves up into a state of self-righteous indignation over the disgraceful behavior of other people, and all the very same behavior does not seem nearly so serious when it's ours, rather than theirs. And John 9 gets at this. We see this unfold in the story in John 9 almost comically. In verse 8, we have these neighbors who can't recognize this man who's been their neighbor for their whole lives because suddenly he can see. He can see, and suddenly they can't see him. And I love this, right? They're crowding around him in verse 8 and 9, and they're having a debate kind of while he's sitting there. And they're like, is this the man who used to sit and beg? It is he. I don't know if it's him. It looks like him. And the man sitting there the whole time, he kept saying, guys, I'm him. Like, I'm right here. But don't talk about me. I'm like, they can't see him. There's something about him they can't see. But what's even worse is that the religious leaders in verse 13, Jesus performs a miracle that no one, you can look it up, no one in the Old Testament and New Testament has ever given a person who's born blind their sight. Jesus is the only person in the scriptures that ever does this. It's clearly a miracle that Isaiah points to as a messianic miracle. And in verse 17, the Pharisees look at this and say, nah. Why? It's the wrong day. He took a man who was blind and gave him sight. No one in history has ever done that. But he did it on the wrong day. So he can't be the Messiah. And then in verse 17, when they bring I love the phrase, the man formerly blind. It's like Prince. The man formerly known as Prince. The man formerly known as blind. They bring the man formerly known as blind to the religious experts. What do the religious experts do? Who do you think he is? Bro, you're the experts. How do you not know? But what happens is they can see, but they cannot see. Their darkened, foolish hearts have used their smug religiosity and self-made salvation schemes to try to prove that they're less blind than all the other blind. But here comes Jesus. Here comes Jesus, who turns his attention and his loving gaze towards them and towards us. Perhaps even in the hearing of this sermon this morning, he doesn't look over our heads. He doesn't pretend that we're not there. But we begin to see that our only hope is that in our spiritual blindness, that Jesus wouldn't pass us by. Our hope is that he sees us even when we can't see him. Because Jesus is not just the light of the world. He's the one who restores sight to the spiritually blind. But what does that cost him? This is the third point here as we come to an end. The question is, what does it cost Jesus to do this? To perform this messianic miracle? It's fascinating. I don't know how you feel about all the spit that's in this passage. There's a whole lot of spit. I got to spend time with my 2 nephews yesterday. And when you're a kid, spit's way more interesting. How far can you spit? What color is your spit? Back when watermelons had seeds, they occasionally do. Some of you know how excited I am when I find a watermelon with seeds. Contests to spit. Jesus uses spit. Now, of course, there's an easy explanation for this in a place that doesn't have plumbing and doesn't have available water in an arid environment. The only way you can really make mud is not by turning on a faucet, it's by using your faucet. What we see Jesus do here in the making of mud is something that feels a lot like Genesis 2, when we're reminded that God first formed the man from the dust of the ground. But Jesus is forming anew this man. But there's a second thing that happens with spit in the Gospels, and this one's more graphic. In the crucifixion accounts of Jesus, there's a lot of things that happen before the crucifixion. And one of them is the various ways that Jesus is humiliated. He's punched, he's slapped, he's mocked. And over again, he's spit on. He's spit on by the same religious leaders here who themselves are blind. He's spit on by the Roman soldiers who will beat him and flog him. This man who needed the soil and anointed a blind man to cause him to see is beaten with blind rage. There's a crown of thorns that are put on his head so that his own blood blinds his eyes. The question that's asked over and over again in the accounts is, what evil did he do? Was it his sin or his parents' sin? No. He was innocent, and we are not. Jesus was spit on so that your spiritual blindness and mine could be healed. Vileness and filth fell on him so that our vileness and filth before God could be cleansed. We're the ones who exchanged the love of God for created things. Jesus exchanged his glory for our condemnation. So, as Paul tells us in Romans 9, that we might receive salvation as a gift. As a gift. So that we would receive it as a gift. I want to end this sermon with a personal story, if I might. It's interesting when somebody's a pastor and they preach, or we're church-going people. Sometimes you think we've always been this way, but I haven't. I became a Christian in my mid-30s, about 16 years ago. And I'd like to, if I could, at least provide I just want to tell you what happened that last night. You see, I remember the last time I was drunk. It was July 28th of 2010. My girlfriend and I had been attending Apostles Church since February, and I had recently come back to church, as people sometimes do, after decades of being away. As a teen, I had lived most of my life as a non-religious person here in the city, and I'd come back looking for answers. And what I got going from a non-religious person to coming to church is I became a religious person. I went to prayer services, I lived a moral life, I tried to be a Christian, I got engaged, I was moving out of the apartment that I lived in with my girlfriend. But on July 28th, 2010, in a single night, all of the moral and religious restraint that I had mounted up for months failed. I realized that all of my old desires were too hard to break. And I woke up in a hotel in Asheville, North Carolina at 3 a.m., hungover, and remembered all of the ways that I had failed the night before. And I crawled into that hotel bathroom and I laid on the floor and I cried. I had sat under gospel preaching for months. I'd heard every Sunday I came to Apostles' Church the good news of the gospel. But on that morning at 3 a.m., as I laid on that floor, and all of my attempts at being a good religious person had failed, my spiritual blindness fell from my eyes like scales, and I could see for the first time that the gospel was true, that I was made righteous through faith in Jesus, just like Paul had said, that it hadn't been won by my religious successes, and it wasn't lost by my moral failures. And in that moment, I understood, not conceptually or philosophically, but personally, that I, Jamie Leahy, had been made righteous, that I'd been made right with God through Jesus Christ. And in that moment, God turned me from religiosity and non-religiosity to Jesus, because he's the one that our hope is in, friends. I was blind, but now I see. That was 16 years ago. 16 years ago this summer, and there's a picture. It was the sunrise the next morning. I look at that picture every year because I remember that I used to be blind. Friends, it's easy to forget what Jesus has redeemed us from. It's easy to put ourselves up above the company of sinners. But all of us are born blind, and our remedy alone is that Jesus would not pass us by. So friends, if you don't know Jesus, come for Jesus. I don't regret it. It hasn't been easy, but I was blind and now I see. And friends, if you too were blind and now you see, would you proclaim Jesus? He's the good news that everybody we love needs. There's so much that they miss. There's so much they can't see. Would you pray that Jesus would open their blind eyes the way he did this man in John 9? Let's pray. Jesus, I'm so grateful that you did not pass us by. How can the blind heal themselves? How can the disabled lift their own disabilities? And yet, Jesus, you are able to heal us. Thank you that you didn't pass me by and so many of my brothers and sisters here this morning. Spirit, we have friends and family that we love so dearly who are blind as we once were. Please don't pass them by. Please help them to see you, Jesus. Please open their ears to the good news of gospel so that we'd be able to rejoice together and say, I was blind, but now I see. Yes, Lord, would you do that? We ask in your name. Amen.